Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Very excited to have Nicolle Merrill as my guest. Nicolle's the author of a really interesting book titled Punched Out in the Face: How to Upskill, Change Careers, and Beat the Robots. She talks about the future of work. She's jumped around in her career in a bunch of interesting ways, landed in some interesting places that we're going to talk about. But before we get into any of that, I'd just like to welcome Nicolle to Trending in Education. Nicolle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. I'm really excited to be here, Mike.
Right. Well, and then I neglected to mention you're also a podcaster.
Yeah, that's true. I have a podcast called 50 Conversations where I talk about all of these things.
Yeah. And it's a wild time to be talking about upskilling and changing careers. It's always a good time to talk about robots because it somehow captures the collective imagination. But before we get into the book, I always like to begin the show by asking for my guest's origin story. So what got you to where you are today, and why is that relevant to folks who are trying to understand where the world of learning is going?
Sure. I'd say that how I got here was a lot of experimenting and not a lot of intention in the early years. I think one of my favorite questions I used to ask was like, when does a career begin? Because it's hard to know, right? My first job when I was 14, like does that count?
Right.
But it did shape me. So really my story is a lot of jumping around, trying different things. I've always been really obsessed with people, with language, with different cultures and stuff like that. So in college, I was a language major. I studied French and Italian and some Russian, and a lot of it was just like literature. So it was like a lot of just reading and writing and analyzing what now we'd call qualitative data. And it was such a wild time, and I lived abroad in that time. And after I graduated, all I wanted to do was just live abroad. Like I was like, how can I get abroad again? This is my world. But there's really not a lot of jobs for that. We didn't have a digital nomad at that time.
Right.
And we didn't have remote work either. So it was non-existent. And so I ended up just taking a lot of just random jobs. I found a job once where I got to sell adventure travel programs in New Zealand. And I was like, yeah, send me to New Zealand. And all I had to do was like give announcements to like auditoriums of 400 and 500 people. And I was like, what a great job. Sure, I'll do this. But, and then I just worked a bunch of, honestly, it's your 20s. I worked those jobs that are just kind of, I need to pay the bills. Like I did a lot of admin stuff. And then ended up in grad school abroad where I studied cross-cultural communication and a lot of qualitative research. And I graduated into the recession. And I was like, this is terrible. Thanks. Coming back like just everything's ideal, and then hitting that 2008 barrier. And after a lot of temp work, I ended up at a startup, a global startup where I worked remotely in the time when nobody knew that was a thing. People were like, is this really a job? Are you getting scammed? I was like, no, I show up, we're on Skype. And that led me to working in universities later on. I transitioned out of that to do something completely different. I was a private jet travel writer for a while there because I wanted to get out of higher education and learn more digital marketing and things like that and try creative work. And then my partner got into school, so I had to move across the country. And I was like, oh no, like I've got to change jobs again after 2 years. And I ended up at Yale School of Management where I was an international career coach. So basically what that meant was I was working with people from all over the world who were coming to change careers. And it was like this eye-opening moment where I was like, oh my God, like I get to listen to people talk about what interests them, what they want. And I get to see them in this really transformational time. 2-year program. I'm not an MBA, but they're in a 2-year MBA program. And it was wild. And they're coming from different cultures. So I had that cultural element. But it was around that time that I started hearing, this was 2016, you started seeing those articles about robots taking jobs, right?
Yes.
And the hype that was like, bots are going to take your jobs, doomed. And you're like, really? Does that really happen? And at the same time, I was talking to employers all over the world who were talking about how they're looking for MBAs that have good communication skills. They can write, they can make decisions with data, they can work with engineers, they can lead. And all of a sudden they're listing these skill sets that honestly are like a unicorn. That's, if you think of a traditional MBA, that's not exactly the skill sets that they have.
Correct.
And if I thought about my own career and I was like, well, I don't have all of these skill sets. Like what's going on here? And so that was really frontline look at how the workforce was starting to change, the kind of talent that recruiters wanted and so on. And I thought, if these elite MBAs at this school don't have all these skills, and some did.
You weren't slumming, you were at Yale.
Right? But I don't have an elite background. I went to a state school and a no-name grad school. They were phenomenal. But so if they don't have all the skills, what's that say to me?
Right.
And so I was like, here we are again. I'm now going to work on my fourth career change.
Yeah.
And I quit that job. And I did two things. I started to try my own hand at entrepreneurship and doing creative stuff. And at the same time, I started researching, what does it mean by the future of work? What does it mean to actually upskill? Everybody's supposed to learn new skills. What does this actually mean?
Yeah.
And I ended up writing a book about it because most of the content written for people about upskilling the future work is directed to executives. It's directed towards leaders. And I wanted to write something that was for people that actually walks them through. Here's how to pick an online course. Here's what certificate programs are. Here's how it fits into your career change process.
Yeah. And where does the hand-to-hand combat fit in? Just because robots are dangerous, and I've just in prep for this conversation, I have seen all 3 Terminator movies.
Yeah.
So where do you learn how to battle the liquid guy and Arnold Schwarzenegger? And then,
I mean, you don't know how to do that already?
I'm lagging. That's why I wanted to get you on the show. Yeah.
No, it's this whole thing about the robots. What's so crazy about this, and why I taught on my book, Beat the Robots, put that in there, was really clickbait, because that's what we've been taught to think about this is you're going to go to work one day and you're going to have a robot coworker sitting there and you're going to be like, hey, what's up? How was your weekend? Not at all what's happening. And this is actually what I write about in the beginning of the book. It's about software. It's about software that's being used in an organization that is going to do the things that some people already do.
Yes.
And we see this, really good example of this is automated scheduling assistants. So if you've heard of Amy, like X.AI, you can just you're emailing someone and they're like, let me loop in my assistant, Amy, and they'll schedule this. And then you get an email from Amy, and you can't see me here, but I'm making quotes.
Scare quotes.
And it's actually a bot that's doing the scheduling. And I saw that years ago, like over 5 years ago. And I was like, wait, what? Because I used to be an admin assistant that did scheduling. Right?
Yeah.
And then there's bots that do interviews, right? That you're engaging in a conversation that are replicating the phone interview. And these are the type of things that most people don't see. And it's happening at scale in all different industries and roles. So this is what's happening when we say bots. This is what I say. These are the robots. It's software. It's automated tools that are changing the way that we work. And that was my journey, was discovering that. And in that process, I started getting really curious about these chatbots. Particularly seeing like HR chatbots that like you go on a web page and try to help you, and they're terrible. Like nobody wants to work with them. And I started writing about how bad they are. And then I saw a job opening at one of the companies for a conversation designer, that is someone who designs those conversations.
Yeah.
And I said, I could do that job. I've been a writer. I understand HR. I could do that. And they hired me.
Nice.
So I got into this new whole career path called conversation design.
Yeah.
I work with AI technology and machine learning and use my creative background to shape these experiences. Because it's not just the tech. Like the tech is, if engineers design chatbots, it really goes pretty poorly. You need creative people that understand language and people to come in and shape these experiences. So that's what I do now.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's a very specific example of what I frequently hear, which is 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will have jobs that we don't even understand today. If we were having this conversation 5 or 10 years ago, we would not have imagined. By then, Nicolle will be a conversation designer.
Right. No, would never seen it.
But it's a thing. And it's that interesting blend. I know a lot of the right brain, left brain stuff has been a bit debunked, but the idea that it's not either or. It's not either get into engineering and get those quote unquote harder skills or be a creative. It's like frequently if you can connect the creative aspect to the engineering and technical implementation, like that's a sweet spot. And it seems you've had the courage, because that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you next about, is more the courage to switch. But it does feel like you moved into a place where you almost have some next level awareness of where your skills would be valuable for a little bit of time. Can you talk about some of your thinking? Like, how did you land in the conversation design space?
Yeah, definitely. I will say you hit the nail on the head though, right there, about just that blending of skills. And that's what we're actually seeing we talk about the future work. The future work has already arrived. So this is just a stand-in term for what's already happening. It's called hybrid skill sets, and Burning Glass Technology really identified this term. And that's that blending, right? It's the technical skills with what we call the soft skills. I call them power skills. That creativity, communication, your ability to collaborate with people from different backgrounds, like all of that, you have to have that. And the jobs that pay well, that are paying the most, and that are the most secure right now are those hybrid jobs. They're the ones that, and I will add analytical skills too. So your ability to work with data and make informed decisions and work with large amounts of information. So that's the sweet spot. As far as what I've done, I think your first career change is always overwhelming, right? It can be and there's different degrees, right? There's the big jump. I'm going from maybe a writer to a software engineer, huge jump. Yeah. And then there's softer jumps. So my first one was, I was a study abroad program manager in a university. This was a couple of years after grad school. And that was like my dream job. I thought that was the job I was like, that was what I worked for. Yeah. And I learned once I got into it that it wasn't my dream job. I was like, oh dear. They don't tell you what to do when you want to exit your dream job. You're like, oh shit, my dream job. It's gone. Okay. Because it was so much emailing and program management. And there's nothing wrong with that as a job. It just wasn't a fit for me. And I think that that the thing that a lot of people tend to overlook is that self-reflection part. I feel like I've got to tough it out. I've got to make this work. I chose this path. Yeah. And we're really in that kind of like old school mindset of you choose that one path forever. And so I've rejected that from as far back as I can remember, right? Like I've rejected it over and over. And so I really had that. And then it was like, okay, how can I find something that's similar, that's in an area that's similar to what I'm doing? And so that's how I jumped into travel writing. It was global. That was it. I knew writing was a power skill of mine. It was something that I've always done well. And so I got some practice writing on the side for different like friends. I wrote outside of work. And I used that. And then I found opportunities at my job when I knew I wanted to leave to write as well. Yeah. So that way I could show them, hey, look, I'm doing it. It may not be my job, but I'm doing it. And that's how I made the jump. Right. And so once it was time to jump again, I just started doing that. It was like, okay, if I know it's time to jump, and I use jump as a term. We use change, but really, if you think about it as jumping, it's a little less, oh my God, I've transformed my whole self. And so it's like really doing that self-reflection to see what it is that you're good at. Yeah. And that you can do, and finding ways to apply that in your current job, and then looking at the deficit. What else do you need? Yeah. And I will tell you, this last one, the conversation design, I think was probably the hardest because I was so unsure. I had all the understanding of how I'd spent so much time looking at how AI works, and I didn't know the technical side. I just understood the implementation side. Yeah. But I tell you what, the first day I walked in to be on that AI team and I was the only non-engineer, I felt like a total imposter. Yeah. So it's not like I'm the expert here that's, oh, just go do this. Like I've been through it. And this is just a natural part of the evolution of changing careers. You take the time to self-reflect, you learn new skills, you apply them, you get a job, you go in, you've got imposter syndrome, and you do the job. Yeah. You almost said, you're reminding me, your talk of jumping is reminding me of skydiving as well. Right? Oh,
like,
yeah.
After you've done a couple of skydives, I imagine, I'm a skydiver, but like it supposedly gets easier after you've done it. So the fear starts to go away and you start to have a little more courage. Because the other thing I haven't heard is folks talk as much about courage these days, but it does feel like a time where we all have to be like, those quiet acts of heroism.
Are absolutely right.
They're everywhere. And you just need to notice the opportunity and then hopefully deliver on the chance that you take. But I'd like to get a little bit into the conversation design piece because I think that's super fascinating. First off, are you secretly designing this conversation as we're talking? Or
no.
Okay.
But I do think about it a lot. I think about conversation design process. It's ironic because I do teach. I've done so many workshops on soft skills training. So I teach people how to have conversations. I've taught engineers and data scientists how to have conversations at work so they can improve collaboration. I've taught people how to network. Like I do all this soft skills training, and now here I am teaching a computer. Yeah. So it's just absurd. Right. But I'm more in the process oriented, the conversation I design. So it's for organizations. So transforming some of their static websites into conversations.
I see. Yeah. So rather than go through like a drop menu or interact with a website, you do it so it could be a conversation. Yeah. That's pretty interesting though as well, because it does require you to think through the crazy things that humans may do. Oh, yeah. So even though that, again, this is like the blending of it where you have to understand there's AI that's powering this, but ultimately it's interfacing with the wackiness that is humanity.
Absolutely.
Any quick stories on that front?
There's not a lot I can say because when you work for these companies, you usually can't say a lot. But I will say I worked on a chatbot that interviewed people. So that was how I got into conversation design. So it's essentially it's the phone screening process, but through a chatbot. Yeah. And I tell you what, I've been a career coach. I have been a staffing recruiter where I've hired people. I have seen the things that people say in interviews. Yeah. from a human point of view, and it still happens on a chatbot. And I could see the data, the conversational data, and I was just like, oh my God. But I think that's the beauty of having people who don't have an engineering background, who have these varied experiences coming into design, because they know that humans are not going to act in a linear fashion, right? They're not going to do, and good design keeps that in mind. And so that's really my role as a designer coming in, is to take that human side and then make sure that we're designing, products that ideally compensate for that, that help that.
Well, and I guess it also helps, you were mentioning this briefly before, even though it may be hard just to be the person who is diverse in the group, but by virtue of having diverse people in the process of designing this conversational technology, it's more likely going to avoid some of the pitfalls around bias and some of the other challenges that we're talking about. Are there any aspects of that you've bumped up against? I would imagine so. Yeah.
Oh yeah. In fact, it's actually what I'm really passionate about in the AI space is how do we get more people involved in the design of these models? So that way it's not just product managers and engineers making decisions.
Yeah.
And part of it, there's a lot of good ways to do it. Obviously, you're hiring making sure that you're hiring people, different genders, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, like getting them in there, like from an engineering point of view. But then there's also like, how do you partner with organizations who are the experts? Because engineers aren't going to be, and data scientists aren't going to be the experts on every single industry or product or the users that it impacts. And so one of the I advocate for, and this is something I talk about in the book and something I've been talking about a lot lately, is making sure that people across all industries have the digital skills. We're talking about understanding how the modern organization works, the basic data fluency, and then 2, understanding the basics of AI. How does artificial intelligence work? The things that I've been talking about today, I say AI is like a container for what the actual technology is, like machine learning, natural language processing. You don't have to know that now, but there are some courses out there, and I've been trying them myself, but I've been taking them to really see, like, how are we teaching people the basics of AI? There's this incredible course out of Finland. The Finnish government decided they want to educate their citizens about the basics of AI. And so they built a course. It's called Elements of AI. It's completely free. It's in English. And it teaches you it. And it's so good. It's actually from a course design point of view. Any instructional designers out there, like, go take this course. It's like, it's so good from an instructional design point of view.
Yeah,
but that's what we need. We need more people who are familiar with the technology because it's shaping our worlds. We all know how it shapes like our movie recommendations. But it's also shaping us at work. And it's going to change how we work. If it hasn't changed your industry yet, it will. Right?
Yeah.
And we need more people's voices involved and speaking up and saying, hey, this isn't right. This impacts this group in this way.
Yeah, for sure. And then I imagine upskilling is something, just there's such massive disruption, and I always note how long it takes for me to bring up the pandemic, but there it is.
There it is.
There's just so much massive disruption this year that folks who maybe were just trying to ride out their career to a certain extent, where if it ain't broke, don't fix it, keep my head down, do my work, and have that balance, that luxury may be going away for some folks. The rug's getting pulled out from under people a little bit. And the scale of the upskilling that will be needed to meet the demands that we're already building, but they've accelerated through the pandemic, is just off the charts. Do you have any perspective on how we're going to get through this? Like, where are people going to go? Because not everybody has the benefit of an organization that is sponsoring their learning, although learning as a benefit is something we've talked about a lot. But do you have any perspective on how we're going to meet the challenge of reskilling, upskilling everyone in the next, say, 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think it's a comprehensive effort. The things you've mentioned, I certainly follow a lot of good work on organizations and companies that are trying to build the infrastructure to upskill people, right?
Sure.
And at scale. And that's part of the process. The process that I'm working on, and the reason I wrote my book, was the individual level. We need a complete rethinking of careers.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I was certainly raised with the idea that it's one career for one lifetime. Now, we know that's not true.
Yeah.
We know that's not true. But why is it that when undergrads are still being taught, this is your major? And we hold on to that major as if that's like the thing that we will then do. Why aren't we teaching a broader group of skills and teaching how do you apply it to different contexts? I was in career services at the MBA level, and it's still the same thing that has been taught for 20 years. And that's no offense to like my colleagues, because they're doing great work. They're often understaffed and underfunded. So you don't have the means to be able to go out and make huge changes. We're starting to see it a little bit. But that rethinking of how we think about our careers. And then there's the, what do we do with all the mid-career professionals who are also like, hey, I want to change, but then what? If you don't know what the jobs are, you don't know what your options are, you don't know, you have kids, because making time for learning with kids is real hard, especially during the pandemic when we're already tapped. So I think it's supporting that. I think I talk a lot about creating learning ecosystems. It's not from an organizational point of view, it's not enough to say, hey, got this benefit, here's some online courses. Right? You need leaders who can step up and say, okay, this is what I'm learning this month. This is how I'm making time for it. And I'm giving you 8 hours a month to make time for your learning on the work, on work's dime. That would be transformational, right? And from the individual point of view, and the reason I wrote this book was to really lay out all these different paths. You don't have to go back to school. Here's how to choose an online program. Here's the difference between an online program, a certificate, and a certification. And what I found is that a lot of people don't know the difference between certificate and certification. And there's a glut of certificate programs out there that aren't actually going to get people jobs. And so it's like helping people sort through your sea of options. That I think is so critical right now. And certainly one of the things I work on, but I think organizations could do a better job of doing. It's not enough to say, hey, here's some online courses.
100%. I'm always talking about the problem of curation. It seems like you're a curator.
Definitely.
You're like a Sherpa. You're helping people climb their respective mountains, which is awesome. Really fascinating stuff. And then if folks want to get the check out the book, it's punched out in the face, like the how to upskill, change careers, and beat the robots. Also, if they want to find you out there in the world, where are the best places to go?
You can find me on Twitter at PDX Nicolle. That's Nicolle with 2 L's. Or you can find me on LinkedIn and follow me there. I post a lot on LinkedIn. I post a lot of reviews on online courses, organizations, stuff like that, about helping people making time to upskill.
Awesome. Fantastic. And then before we let you go, I always ask my guests what's new and emerging that's capturing your imagination these days. So could be some of what we just talked about, but is there something new, recommendations, anything that's new and exciting out there?
Honestly, I already plugged the thing that I've gotten the most excited about. It was actually that course, The Elements of AI. There's also another one that's AI for everybody that's on Coursera. And for those of you that haven't experienced Coursera before, it's a great intro to Coursera as a learning platform. You can do them for free. So I highly recommend checking that out if you want an intro to the basics of AI and understanding how it works in a business context. These courses are made for people without technical backgrounds. So that's what I'm pretty excited about right now. And of course, every time I discover new books and podcasts, that's really where I get excited. So,
But I mean, but it's a great point though, too, because AI is not just for engineers anymore. And you're talking about the courses and the resources that are out there for everyone. So even if you're not going to be doing the engineering, you still need to have some foundational understanding of AI to stay relevant in your job. And then you're a great example of someone who can also discover new careers that are genuinely rewarding for people who aren't engineers as well.
Absolutely.
There's plenty out
there. I think we're taught trying to just think about just the basic jobs. But to give you context, I remember last year I had someone designing my website, and she's like, oh yeah, on the side, I've also been designing AR filters for Snapchat. And I was like, oh, that's a job. I hadn't thought about it. And it's until you talk to someone and they tell you and you're like, holy crap, I didn't know that was a job. So there's so much to discover out there and we can't possibly know it all. So those conversations really bring out those cool opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And also finding those Sherpas, finding those curators who can help us navigate the complex and wacky times that we're living in. But Nicolle, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Definitely. Thanks for the good conversation. I love it.
Yeah. And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoy what you're hearing. If you like what you're hearing, write us a review, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.